Support for this program comes from Jazz on the Tube, the Internet's largest collection of free streamable classic jazz videos. From Miles Davis to Louis Armstrong, from Thelonious Monk to Duke Ellington. You'll find it all on jazzonthetube.com. Start your free subscription today.
Welcome, everybody, to Jazz on the Tube. This is our podcast where we talk with artists and educators and musicians and people involved in advancing the music forward. And today we have somebody that covers a lot of areas that we're interested in. And I was really glad that we were able to get some time together to talk about her career and her work. It's a really interesting one. We're going to say hello right now to Michele Rosewoman.
Greetings to all. Good to be here.
Great to have you on, Michele. I've been aware of you since at least the 80s, maybe even earlier. I know you came to New York in '78, which was sort of a golden creative period for so many people. But I want to talk first a little bit about the Bay Area scene. We have listeners from all over the world, and not everybody is maybe aware of how vibrant, creatively vibrant the Bay Area is when it comes to creative music and jazz. And you started,
yeah, it's always... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so you started on the piano at 6?
Yes.
What kind of things were you working on then?
Working on, I would say that it was, my memory is just of this old upright coming in and kind of waking up each day and seeing it there, like it looked like a big Christmas present. It intrigued me from day one, and I just started exploring and experimenting. So I think that I was left to my own devices for some time and just grew to love it with no particular direction. And then eventually took some lessons to learn to read and get around in a basic way on the instrument. So I took those simple steps at the beginning to do that. But in the meanwhile, my home was full of a lot of music, and I had music in my head. So I think just sitting down and seeing that I could hit notes and music was probably what I was working on the most.
Gotcha. And you grew up in Oakland, which for people that don't know is a part of the Bay Area across the bay from San Francisco.
Yeah, San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley is kind of the trinity there. And there's definitely a vital area artistically and politically. I think at least my home was also a reflection of that, art and politics. So very historical on many levels. The history of that area is worth looking into, and musically speaking, it's been great traditions of gospel, blues, funk, and jazz from the area. So I just kind of feel lucky to have been born where I was born and come up where I came up. I think that it's a vital part of the country.
I know that I lived actually on Fillmore Street in San Francisco for about 8 years, and that area has an amazing history. It was called the Harlem of the West, actually, in the 40s. Oh. Yeah, in the 40s and 50s.
Wow.
Yeah, before all the so-called urban renewal, there were clubs and hotels and restaurants, all black-owned, and it was a really thriving place commercially and artistically, and obviously that formed a kind of a core area that just fed the whole region. One of the first people to give you sort of formal guidance in piano was a guy named Ed Kelly. Is that right?
Yeah, the great Ed Kelly. Yeah, he was. Well, I found myself hanging around Laney Junior College, a vocational college, where they were looking for a piano player for the big band, and at the time, I could improvise. I didn't really read chord changes and whatnot, but I remember they auditioned me on a blues, and I could do that. So they chose me, and that was kind of the beginning of the most vital kind of career shaping or direction shaping part of my life in terms of the music. That's where I met Ed, who was a real hands-on kind of teacher. He really was never my teacher in the classroom. I took a harmony class, and I played in the big band, and I hung. So I don't think I might have got credits. I wouldn't know. I took 2 semesters of a harmony class. That's the extent of my schooling.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I got into, there's a whole story there behind the fact that I got into UC Berkeley on a fluke and left within 3 months. And found myself, pulled by what I was really wanting and learning at Laney, and the schedules were conflicting, and I just faded on out. But I got in there by fluke because they actually rejected me when I auditioned to get in the music department. I improvised for my audition.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to audition just to take an ear training class, and the teacher said, well, why aren't you going for a major? And I said, well, I did, but they didn't accept me. And I remember she slamming her fist on the table and saying, I disagree with their decision. And I got a call within a week, and I was in, and within 3 months I was gone. And that was, at the time, there was nothing there but 16th to 18th century classical music and a lot of attitude and arrogance about it. And I was weaving between Laney and there and coming with questions, and they would say, oh, that doesn't exist, and there is no such thing. And, so I just kind of knew where I wanted to be. So I hung at Laney, and groups formed, and there were gigs, and there was the great Ed Kelly, who is one of the greats. He stayed in the Bay Area. He was he played a lot at the Keystone Corner with lots of people that came through, and Sparrow and him were very close, and he was, offered to go on the road by Sparrow early on, but he had a family, and he just chose to stay close to the Bay Area. He's from Texas originally, but he pretty much grew up in the Oakland area. So he shaped a lot of people, but we had a real personally deep, musically fruitful relationship, and I can say that it was amazing to move to New York and then be able to come back and do. We did do a duo concert together with Tootie Heath and Ray Drummond in the rhythm section. And right before I moved to New York, I played the Keystone Corner on a double bill with him solo piano and me with my Lunar Ensemble, which was a small, very, very explorative group where I was playing congas, music, and piano. So, but Ed was definitely, he was one of the greats and very under-recorded, a great pianist and a great organ player. And he had very much his own style. He was super modern, but super rooted in tradition. And I absorbed a lot of the real older tradition through Ed, also through just hearing all the classic music or classic jazz when it came in my upbringing. But through Ed, I think a lot of osmosis,
Gotcha.
Ed is my foundation for sure.
Gotcha.
I hope people will check him out. There's not that much to get your hands on, but I try to make his stuff available, some of the demo tapes and various things I had. There's only 2 recordings of Ed under his own name.
Yeah, I think sometimes fans don't realize that there's being a great musician or an accomplished musician, and then there's being a person that's attained a certain amount of celebrity. And those are not contradictory things, but they're different things. And
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of work, as you know, as every touring musician knows, it takes a lot of work to build up that, for lack of a better word, celebrity. I don't mean in a trivial sense, but just to be known, to be known outside of your community. It takes a lot of work. And I'm thinking of people like Von Freeman in Chicago. He didn't leave Chicago, but he was one of the greatest tenor players that ever lived. And
I think all these vital artistic centers have great mentors and foundational members of the jazz community that just did not get known too far beyond their arena, but who are among the greatest ever. They just didn't get that notoriety.
Yep.
And you've got them in most places. There's several, from Oakland to Philly to Pittsburgh to Chicago to Detroit to everywhere in New Orleans and on, any city center with, exploding, bursting kinds of artistic energy. And the Bay Area definitely has always had that. I did feel I reached limitations with it, and that's why I moved to New York.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important to go out and hear the music live, because what's on the radio is not necessarily everything that's out there, and there may be somebody in your town who's unbelievable, and you don't want to miss them.
Hmm.
Hey, let's talk about the other stream of influence in your life that started in the Bay Area, which is your interest in Cuban and Haitian spiritual and ritual music. How did that come about?
Well, when it went into action was also right there in Laney. But in my home, I came up hearing a lot of what they call world music today. But, music from the mountains of Chile, from music from Africa, music from India, Indonesia, spiritually based music that had a certain impact on me always, along with, all the R&B that was so prominent, and so much of what we heard, R&B and funk and the classic jazz in my home and the world music. Those were really all my influences, my strongest influences. But there was a flyer on one of those old wooden light posts
Yep.
on campus there at Laney, and it said class in Afro-Cuban percussion. So I went, and that was really when I think my whole direction was born, although I didn't know it then, because I was already deep into the piano and into improvisational music and jazz. And when I started to explore that route, they were, very parallel worlds for a long time, but eventually I just started hearing them as one. But I walked into a class there that was being taught by a great percussionist and a great teacher, Marcus Gordon, who's based in San Francisco. He doesn't play due to various hand issues that came up, but he's always stayed very connected, and he just kept it moving. He went from bata and congas to the guita because his hand was all right for that, and he went to the cantos and learning all the folkloric songs. So, and now he's a photographer and a chef. So, but Marcus Gordon was my first teacher of the folklore, and he took us right into the more spiritually based stuff, the 6/8 bembe rhythms and the songs to the orishas, and that was the first stuff that I ever learned. And I walked in, it was about 13. I don't know, I always say the number 13. I don't know why. But I figured it was 13, about 13 men in there, or young men and myself, and 2 or 3 conga drums. And I thought, wow, I'm never going to get to play. And it turned out the opposite, because he was always putting the drum in front of me. And
Wow.
and I guess that I was picking up things pretty quick, so he had me demonstrating and showing people how to do things. And he became a lifelong friend, and I studied privately with him for years and the years to follow. And at the time, it was a lot of Wawanko, Papines, and Matanza and Havana style. It was Papines and Matanza, Matancero. I have all those records from the time. So I was playing a lot of Wawanko at the time, learning the forms and the intricacies, and that's how I got launched in that direction. And then eventually I started hearing the folklore in broader context in terms of the rest of the music that I was busy learning, creating, and being a part of.
And you were doing all this while you were a teenager, more or less?
Started that class, I think I was 18 when I took that class, yeah.
That's wow. So, you really fell into a lot of beautiful musical situations at an early age.
Yeah, I really did. That was the key. I think that to feel that you have, to know that you have mentors, guides, and that you're where you're supposed to be. I was just so clearly where I wanted to be. It was nothing but excitement and adventure from that moment on,
Wow.
From the time that I wandered into Laney. It was just a raw, excited energy there, and Ed's friends were always coming through. Farrell was there a lot. Hampton Hawes. Oh, shoot, there's a lot of folks that came through, and they had the big band performing with John Handy and different great artists who were based out there. So, and Ed was in the church as well as in the jazz world, and that was dichotomy at the time. He had to deal with some stuff around that.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to take the big band concerts into some churches. And I remember getting ready to play in one, and Ed talking to the people and saying that we were supposed to play in the church down the street, but they decided they couldn't have the devil's music in there.
Right.
And Ed asked folks to listen to what we were getting ready to do and tell him if they thought that could come from that side.
Yeah.
So he always, had his feet in both. And then, like I say, and then Marcus, who I mentioned was the instructor for that class, he played for dance classes, for African dance classes, and we used to go sit in and play with him at the classes. So it was just a complete circle. It was a completed circle, of dance and music from several angles for me. So it was all going on at the same time. But as I say, at that time, they were really parallel worlds. People were not into both. And they seemed to be opposing worlds because one was all about expanding tradition while the other one was about maintaining tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And yet for me there was no conflict, and plus there was so much in common, just in terms of how I heard the music, rhythmically, thematically. It just seemed, obviously it all comes from the same place, for the roots are the same. So one would expect there to be foundational similarities, and I think that's what I've always felt and always built on.
It's amazing, Laney, just for people that may not recognize the name, this is a community college. This is not some, elaborate,
right.
Highfalutin place. And yet it sounds like it had one of the best music programs anybody could conceive of.
Well, it was basic. It's just that Ed was there, and that the big band leader, Diamante, was a certain kind of person. There was a lot of love and energy. But I remember on one of my return trips from New York, finding out that the entire budget for an entire semester in the music department was $500.
Wow.
So there was, very little. It was just about the energy. It drew. There was a certain passion there that just carried over for a lot of people, forever. But it was, like you say, and today they call it community college. Back then they called it a junior college.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just no better place for me. It was everything I was excited about was happening right there.
Well,
and I was going to say that, after any class or event there, everything poured over into everyone's homes and into the clubs where we play. It just one thing led to the next, kind of nonstop, even in terms of what you needed to work on and what you had to teach yourself, because me, I wasn't enrolled. I don't really know what the music program as a whole would have been like then. I just had my toe in it, just enough to stay so connected and weave my own way through it. But there was never any doubt about what I needed to be working on, learning next, and getting together at the piano.
That's great. And I often say that when you see an artist, if you look into their background at all, you're going to find out that behind that artist there was a community, a scene, or a community that nobody really appears in a vacuum. And it's so fascinating to learn about these various communities and scenes, and they're all supported by the generosity, really, of, I would call them elders. I don't know how old Ed was at the time, but he was older than the students. And the music thrives because of the generosity of so many musicians and educators to help the younger generation find their way.
Oh, he was classic that way. He was so faceless. I used to go back on visits, and Mr. Majors in East Oakland was where they had a lot of jam sessions, and I would go through, and Ed would lead the sessions, and there would be, 30 saxophonists, one after the other. Ed just played, no matter the level, whoever sat in.
Wow.
All he ever did is encourage everyone. He was so encouraging. I wrote a poem about it called A Fire Burning, and just about the passion that he kept alive, even in the context. This was just a rock. I thought he was a rock, really as solid as he could be, and he just kept the creative energy flowing, even though he would maybe play oh shoot, imagine 30 saxophonists sitting in, not to mention other instruments, and he would just sit up there and encourage them one by one, real faceless.
Wow.
Really giving all the way to the end. I remember once asking him, I already had, I don't know, 3 recordings out, and I'd been in New York for maybe, I don't know, 10 years. And Ed, in his whole career, had only, at that time, I think he had 1 or maybe his second one. And I remember asking, Ed, don't you get frustrated? I mean, you're so great, and you've only ever put out 2 records. The world should know you. Don't you ever get frustrated? And he said, he called me Mickey and Mick. I said, nah, Mick. I said, no. He said, no. I said, how is that, Ed? He said, and that's where his spiritual beliefs kicked in. He said, because I know I'm going on from here. Mm. So he just, very, very, rooted in his religion and spiritual beliefs, to feel that, as Oliver Lake puts it too, passing through this life. And so this is just a part of a continuum, and his faith gave him peace to be completely, he was never in a hurry, not at the instrument and not physically, and anyone that came into the room was put at complete ease by him. Mm. I mean, it was really something to behold, There wasn't any kind of person that could walk into his presence that you wouldn't just see them exhale and relax, with the very first contact you'd make with Ed. He just had a way about him to put everyone at ease and to support everyone in their growth and to encourage. He was so encouraging. Mm. I mean, we can all hear his words and his tone of voice, that down home, street way of just saying, go on now, go on, get it, Mm. He was something. Ed is missed by so many people. And he's faceless in the way that you were saying, that, just giving to so many others and producing a whole line of creative musicians through that generosity.
Mm. Mm. I'm glad we heard a part of his story on this call. In 78, you went to the Big Apple, which is a big deal. I don't think, sometimes people may not realize, who are not musicians, that, and I don't know whether you felt this or not, but for a jazz musician to move to New York is an exciting thing, but it's also an intimidating thing. It's a little bit like going to play baseball in Yankee Stadium. You really have to feel that you're together.
Well, it was definitely exciting, so exciting that that's all it was, really. I wasn't feeling intimidated because it just, something was making me do that, the sequence of events, because I used to spend a lot of time at the Keystone Corner, and I met a lot of the New York, I was most excited by what I was hearing coming out of New York-based musicians. Mm. And then I got, certain kinds of encouragements. I'll never forget Jimmy Lyons of Cecil Taylor's group, who's an amazing human being and an incredible musician, but he told me, you really should come to New York. And I got that from a few people, and I already had associations, because I ended up, for me, there's kind of no beginning to the story, and it's nothing but kind of the magic of being where you're supposed to be and doing what you're supposed to do, in that I ended up living next door to Baikita Carroll, one of the founding members of the Black Artist Group from St. Louis. Mm-hmm. For 3 years in San Francisco, from 75 to 78, but and through Baikita, I met Oliver Lake, Julius Hemphill, all the AACM and BAG members out of Chicago and St. Louis, and I did performances with Baikita, with Julius Hemphill and Julian Priester and various people before I moved to New York, and everyone stayed with Baikita, and I formed an association with Oliver Lake, who gave me my first professional gig in New York when I moved here. Oh. So, yeah, I had some people that I knew already I had an association of some sort with, and that I could build on it. And I don't know, it's kind of amazing to me that I made the move. I remember thinking, okay, everything's working great here. I was teaching piano, I was teaching basic Afro-Cuban percussion. I had a good place to live. I had a car. Things were working. And I said, let me see if I can take myself and all of this to New York. And if I can make it work there, because that's where I need to be artistically. So, and also, just the story of how I came to visit here before moving here, and the way I came on my place, that I then went home and moved into 8 months later. I got the place before I came here, and I'm still in it 40 years later.
Oh, wow.
And it was a 9th-floor walk-up with no elevator after 5 on the weekend, and no heat after 5 on the weekend. But there was space, and there was windows, and I could play, and I could be in New York. And I was young enough to deal with the hardships of it. But it was just the whole sequence of events that when I got here, when I made the move, I didn't come here and look for a place because I found it before I moved here. And then I just lit into the music scene and to making my way through it, and to keep on growing musically. And that was a lot of fun to do, being based here. And as you said at the beginning of the conversation, the late 70s, 78, that was an amazing time in New York.
Yeah.
A truly amazing creative. The more creative and original you were, the bigger audience you kind of had. And I remember the shift in the 80s, but we had the Tin Palace, and we had Sam Rivers' Loft, and just where all this incredibly creative music was going on, and I felt immediately at home because my influences were, although I really had started out in the traditions by way of ed and the environment I was in, learning the basics. It's interesting, too, because people all around me knew then I was heading in another direction before I did. But by the time I was neighbors with Baikita, I was wide open to that realm of music, and in the interim had gotten deep into percussion. And I played all through those years. I played congas a lot, and studied and learned in both worlds. So I think that by the time I came here, all of my basics were written in my molecular structure. They were, there was a blueprint there. And then it was just about further growth and building and developing of my passions, because I think I just always allowed the things that shaped me the most and that moved me the most to be what I explored.
It sounds like you really had a foot in New York even before you got to New York because of your association with Bikita and all the guys that were coming out.
That, and yet just the way things lead to each other, because actually, interestingly, Marcus Gordon, who I speak of as my first teacher in the realm of folklore, when I was coming to visit New York, he said, "Hey, I'll make this story short, but hey, why don't you go over to the Drum and Percussion Center and say hi to a young lady there who's a well-known percussionist friend of his. Go tell her I said hi, Carol Steele." And I said, "Okay, when I'm over there, I'll do that." So while I was there, a woman came in asking her. She came in to buy something, and I stepped back, and she asked her, "Do you still teach percussion?" And Carol said, "No," and I'm over there pointing to myself. She said, "But she does." So I go to give this woman a lesson, and I'm living in the apartment across the hall from where she lived.
Ah, wow.
That's where I am today, 40 years later, and for 40 years. In other words, the music takes you everywhere. Marcus sent me there. That led to me getting my apartment. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so it's kind of, those are the stories I could tell one after the other.
Yeah.
That's how I know that I would never have done anything different, any of that differently. There might be a couple things in life I would do different, but not that many.
Wow, and that's what it takes. It takes that kind of affiliation, association, immersion to develop. It's you said, wow, it's great, and it solved a mystery to me because I read your bio and it said that you played with Oliver Lake and Julius Hemphill. I'm thinking, out in San Francisco, how did that happen? But now I get it. I get it now.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well,
that was a beautiful time.
Yeah, the 70s, amazing, and all the lofts that people had, and even Ornette had Artist House earlier in the 70s, and everybody had something going on.
Well, the Bay Area was like that too. They had an amazing little club in Oakland called Mapenzi. Every inch of the floor and the walls and the tables was all African art done by an artist, and they had to leave that when they left there too. But in that space, very small space, they had all these solo duo concerts with everyone from Bradford from L.A., the great trumpet player, and John Carter, the clarinetist, to duos with Lester Bowie and Muhal Richard Abrams,
Wow.
and solo concerts by Oliver Lake, and duos with Julius and Baikita. I played solo there. And there was the Metropolitan Arts Center in San Francisco, which is where everyone played when they came to town. It was just, you could develop your ideas in public there at that time. And I would say that was the difference about New York. Although in those first years that I was here, it still had that vibe. But after that, it got into the polished stage, you know, the state wearing suits. And one could say that the Wynton Marsalis age of jazz, which kind of changed the face of it in many ways. But before that, it was just, you could just explore in that wide open way. But just to say that the Bay Area was also exploding with that kind of creativity during that same time. And that was great to get to hear so much of that before I even came to New York.
It's great. It's great to hear this story because it fills in a lot of our understanding of what was happening in the Bay Area. Let's talk about your two groups. Two of your main focuses. Quintessence is one, and New Yoruba is the other. If you could introduce those to people and let them know what the concept behind them is. And
Sure. Well, New Yoruba was born of this integration of the musics that I was so and am so deeply into, but had started to hear the connectivity and started to develop it. And I've always been blessed to be surrounded by great percussionists. I mean, always. And when I came to New York, I was around a lot of young percussionists who had the same passion as me in terms of New Yorkers, Afro-Americans, every kind of person that was deep into Cuban folklore that had taken it to a certain level of knowledge. And there were circles that I became a part of in that regard. And in the meanwhile, in 1980, the great Orlando Puntilla Rios came here from Cuba, from Havana, and he brought with him not only the knowledge, but he had the need to create his own world so that he could present his music. So he was like a scout, and he was spotting those who he could pull in, who could learn, and he was generous with the information, whereas past masters who had been here were much more secretive, because that was the nature of it, especially as relates to bata and the spiritual side of music. So Puntilla pulled me in right away, and Soundscape in 1980 was Verna Gillis' space, where she was. Now this was the center of the explosion of Cuban musicians and jazz musicians coming together and creating a mutual world. And Verna was at the heart of it. She'd done a lot of field recordings for Folkways Records. She was very into folklore music and very into more modern avant-garde jazz. In fact, my first performance as a leader was at a public school in Greenwich Village, where I rented the hall and actually found someone who footed the bill. I think the whole thing, musician fee, rental, everything came to about $500 back in the day. And that was my first performance as leader, and I had a great percussionist, Skip Burney, with me, known as Brinquito now. And I had Abdul Wadud on cello from the St. Louis world, and I had Baikita Carroll on trumpet.
Wow.
So I had trumpet, cello, congas, and piano. And Verna Gillis was there. That's how I met her. She came out.
Oh, okay.
And from that time on, I had somewhere to present my own music, which invited me to play at Soundscape. And that started to be a regular thing where I would put new concepts together. I had groups with 2 tubas, 2 trumpets, and piano and drums, no bass. I had Bob Stewart and Howard Johnson and Baikita Carroll and Rasul Siddiq. I had a chance to experiment with really interesting instrumentation and things. And then when Puntilla came and Daniel Ponce, Soundscape is where we all came together and explored all kinds of stuff. It was ridiculous. It was just so much energy, and it was nonstop. And so of that, Puntia invited me to classes he was teaching for bata. And women in his world didn't touch the drum. And
Right.
he knew what I was heading towards, so he invited me to absorb the knowledge. And from that time on, and then he had me singing in the chorus for his performances with his own group, and I just came to know his music, his sound, and had a foundation to build on. And I proposed this concept of the New Yoruba Ensemble, the celebration of Cuba in America to National Endowment for the Arts. I received the grant, and that gave birth to the ensemble and our debut performance at the Public Theater.
Oh, yeah.
And featuring Puntia. So that's how the group started, and I had started to hear a lot of the chants, the cantos, and the rhythms in a very contemporary setting. And I was dreaming it. I would wake up hearing it. And so I started writing it, and then I would write it in the keys that Puntia sang in naturally, and I started bringing a lot of the rhythms and things that I was exposed to so directly into my original music, which was already shaped by all of that through my listening and playing percussion. So I found a lot of places that things just fit naturally. Well, that's how New Yoruba was born, and we debuted in 1983. Quintessence was a group that I formed, and I think our first concert might have been in 1987 at the Cooper Union. It sounds like you were there.
Mm-hmm.
So that group was for my very, very creative, open-ended writing and concept, and I looked for like-minded players. Butch Morris, by the way, was an associate of mine on the West Coast, and I mentioned that because he was a part of some of the things that I did. In fact, he conducted the first New Yoruba performance. I had him there as a conductor. And I just called on, for New Yoruba, I called on all the musicians who I'd come to be associated with. From the first group was Oliver Lake by Keita Carroll, Howard Johnson, Bob Stewart, John Stubblefield, Rasul Siddiq, Firon Aklas, Rufus Reed, and Puntia with two of his students, but also Gene Golden, who's already an elder here, and who came up with Marcus Gordon in New York. There's so many connections. I could just, this could go on for hours. So anyway, New Yoruba came to be in that manner. Quintessence called for my finding musicians that were able to hear things like I was, and that was really limited at the time. And the first Quintessence group was going to be Greg Osby by Keita Carroll, Rufus Reed, and Steve Rowan. I had met Steve Rowan through Oliver. So, you kind of move in a circle and one thing leads to the next. Keita at the time had some health issues, and I had to make a real sudden change. This was the birth of Quintessence, and Greg Osby recommended that he move to soprano. And play the trumpet parts and give his alto seat to Steve Coleman.
Oh.
So that's how this group formed, and we followed that first concert at Cooper Union with a performance at the Painted Bride in Philly, and I had Terry Lynn on drums, Carolyn Carrington, and Anthony Cox on bass, Greg Osby and Steve Coleman as the front line, and then we went in the studio and recorded our first Enja Records CD. We did 4 with Enja, and I have 5. I've also released one under my own label. So since that time, Quintessence has been made up of, the horn section has included Osby, Steve Coleman, Gary Thomas, Miguel Zenon, Steve Wilson, Craig Handy, Mark Shim. I would just say the list of the most creative voices imaginable of the time. There are young, creative players who could really hear conceptually what I was looking for, because I wanted musicians who could play inside and play out, who could play concept, but who could play entirely inside the changes as well, because we kind of did all of that. So it was really my main vehicle for my very creative writing and development of concept. And all the players that came through brought their voices to it. So that would be kind of the birth of the two ensembles. Quintessence has 5 recordings out. We actually haven't recorded since 2006 because I've been so focused on New Yoruba, and in these last, I don't know, about the last 5-6 years, it's been a really complete focus on New Yoruba, and it's a good thing because it led to our debut recording and released in 2013. It was 30-year anniversary and a debut recording, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
You know, but it put it like this: things happen when in their own time and when they're supposed to. And I think that it took me a long time to reach fruition in bringing the worlds together in such a complete way. And it's taken nonstop immersion in both worlds. Mm-hmm. I don't toy with either. Mm-hmm. And, you know, since I've been a part of this grand folkloric tradition, which you not trying to defy or defile at the same time, it has to expand in the context, but it has to have a foundation that remains. And I've been so blessed in that for 25 years, Puntilla was the foundation. And with his passing, there was a shifting of the guard, and he brought Pedrito Martinez in, and the both of them brought Roman Diaz in. Mm-hmm. And at this point, Roman has now been the foundation for the group for a very long time. And these are the greatest folklorists in the country. So, you know, I'm very blessed in that regard.
Yeah, it's an amazing enterprise, and just in case anybody missed that, the group had been working for 30 years before they recorded. So I just strongly recommend, if anybody wants to hear what happens when somebody who's rooted in the jazz tradition, who's also rooted in the, we'll say, Yoruba tradition via Cuba, you got to hear this record. It's two CDs. What's the name of it?
It's just called Michele Rosewoman's New Yoruba 30 Years, a musical celebration of Cuba in America.
Wow, so 30 years of cultivation leading to that recording. Now, the exciting news here is you've taken the group back to the studio again.
Right, and we had 2 dates, one in August and one in October, and we completed the recording of what will be our 35th anniversary release next year.
Great. And are you performing with that group anywhere in the near future?
We are. January 7th will be at the free, open to the public concert at the Dimena Center. It's a combination of the Chamber Music America conference. January 7th, 3 p.m. at the Dimena Center. There's a classical group and New Yoruba, and both groups are presenting commissioned works.
Great.
Which is the bulk, and this commissioned work of mine is the bulk of the new recording that we just completed, and it's quite undertaking. I mean, a huge undertaking, and it took a long time for it to land, but it landed. And along with that, we also recorded a work of mine that was originally recorded by Arturo Faril on the Cuba The Conversation Continues record that we recorded in Cuba, and it's a piece of mine called Alabanza, which we've now done, recorded in the context of New Yoruba. And then there's also a sequence of vocal sequence for the deity known as Oya, with Nina Rodriguez on lead vocals, and that's a beautiful voice there. So that's going to be the new release, and it's the commissioned work. Shall I go into some detail on that?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. That's built entirely on the foundation of the Oru Seco, the Oru Igbodu, which is played, it's completely ceremonial, played at ceremonies, and it's called Oru Seco, Seco meaning dry, meaning without song. And this is called Oru de Oro, which roughly translates to room of gold or sacred room. And this sequence of sacred rhythms is played in front of the throne at ceremony before the public is involved in the celebration. Mm-hmm. And it's a very complex sequence, and the tamboreros, the great folklorists who study Bata, spend their life learning this language, and this still, in the face of everything, only there's more and more people that are involved, but really a handful in the face of all of those who play percussion or drums. And it's a lifelong study. It's an oral tradition. And I had to dig in deep. I would have never taken it on if I hadn't spent the past few years studying it deeply myself. And, with the changing of the times, my world is now full of folklorists who are willing to share directly. It was hard to learn and have the depth of knowledge that I always counted on myself to have to present in Yoruba in any capacity. I want everything correct all the time. So to take on this piece that I wrote, there's no way I could have done that without my hands on the drums. Mm-hmm. And things, the changing of the guards, and I'm still learning from those who hold on to the tradition for dear life. At the same time, these are people who know me, my goals, my intentions, and my abilities. So I have always generously given knowledge, and because of that, I was able to take this project on. So one could say basically what I did is kind of endow 23 orishas with musical content when normally it's just drums, nothing but bata, which are speaking the Yoruba language. But I built it specifically around Romandias because every lead tambolero, the one that plays the iya, the mother drum that guides and leads the rest of the bata section, has their own thing. Although it's always the same in most ways, but there's the voice of the individual, and there's certain things that change through that person's interpretation and intuition. So I built it on Romance Oluseco, and it's the whole piece is anchored in the rhythmic patterns associated with the orishas or the deities, And it's complex because for the longest, no one in the group except the tamboreros and myself knew where the one was for anything.
Oh, wow.
But little by little, they found, all the great musicians in the group found things to anchor themselves to, whether it be the okonkolo, which plays more like a clock, more of the downbeats, and also the transitions from one to the other are really complex. There is what's called the yamada, which is a call. It calls the next section or the next rhythm, and it's likely to start on the E of the one or the and of the three, where your ear will hear it like a downbeat, and it just isn't one. So there's a lot of purposeful mysteries there. So that's the piece that the group has been most focused on. It's been super challenging because the percussionists, the folklorists, are used to playing ceremonially only.
Right,
and
right.
For only playing that, I should say, only playing that only ceremonially. And they're not counting cycles in this context to create charts and bring musicians in who are reading parts that are built and really woven into it to the degree that I've written it and conceived it. The percussionists then had to start calculating in ways that are not the usual for them. And so it's been a challenge from every angle, but I think it's been a feat that we achieved. We achieved the goal, and when it comes out on record, it should be something to hear. I think from what I'm being told by the folklorists, that nothing like this has been done, and that it's something incredibly unique, and that it should be a kind of an exciting moment and development in our history. I think my personal growth in relation to the folklore is absolutely necessary if the Yoruba is going to evolve and grow. So I keep studying.
And the exciting thing is people listening to this can see this performance live on the 7th of January. Can you tell us about the venue? I don't recognize the name for some reason.
No, it's mostly classical venue. Chamber Music America is an organization that has entirely opened up the definition of chamber music by defining it in the literal definition. It means up to 10 musicians, each one playing an individual chart with no conductor. So early on, they say, well, hey, that's jazz too. and they made the funds that were so, at the time especially, much more available for classical music than jazz. They started making these funds available to jazz musicians, to composers, so that you could apply for a commission and for a project and receive a commission to write a new work.
Wow.
So they have an annual conference which is becoming more and more inclusive and diverse in terms of those who apply, those who receive commissions, those who attend the conference, keynote speakers, performers at the conference, etc. So, but they're using a venue that's, I think, been really just associated with classical music, and they've used it for the last few years. I'm trying to look it up real quick online so I can give you the exact address.
Okay.
If I can. And I'm almost there. I can tell you in a second.
All right.
We can edit, or you can talk on.
And I'll also post it on the page that the interview appears.
Okay.
But it is a great thing.
I got it. Yeah, it's going to be Sunday, January 7th at 3 p.m. The Demena Center for Classical Music, 450 West 37th Street. And it's going to feature the Argus Quartet, and they're performing their commissioned work. And it's going to feature my New Yoruba Ensemble performing our commissioned work, Oru de Oro. And I think the whole thing happens pretty much from 3 to 5.
Gotcha.
3 and to 5. Free. Free to the public, free and open to the
What
public.
What an amazing thing. And I hope everybody who can make it makes it, because things like this do not happen very often in life. To be able to hear this when it's first being performed for the first time. Working on
Oh, well, it's not, just so you know, this is not a debut. It's even better that way, because it's landed and you're going to hear it at its height, as opposed to at its beginning stages of development.
Gotcha.
Because something like this, needed a lot of performance to land.
Yeah, time to mature.
But yes, absolutely. And I just want to mention that for those who have not in the same room as the bata drums, this is an experience you have to have, because it's very, very moving on levels you would never expect. I mean, they're speaking the Yoruba language and at all times addressing spiritual entity, whether you believe in God or whatever, but it's literally spiritual in every way at all times. It's not secular. It's not, let's have some fun and try this and try that. It's an ancient language, and it's amazing to think that they're actually speaking Yoruba. So it's kind of a lot to wrap your head around, especially when you hear it. You kind of have to spend a lot of time thinking about how can it be that they're speaking the language and it comes out like this. Mm-hmm. It's very incredibly virtuosic. Is that a word?
Yeah,
it is.
It's, and not only is it a word, it's the word. Because guys, really, if you haven't, when you hear this, you'll know what we're talking about. This is something spectacular. You know how they say, "Oh, it's not rocket science." It's rocket science.
It's rocket science.
This is very serious music.
Oh yeah, most people can't even begin to figure out what's going on a lot of the time, because all the intricacies and the cracks between the cracks of time are being explored in ways you never knew it existed, and the slightest nuance turns your entire way of hearing what you're hearing. And rhythm is profound, and it's the motivator behind my writing. And I found that it's really, because I teach composition, I teach a lot, and I find that in people's approach to soloing, people's approach to writing music, they really neglect rhythm as a motivating idea or a foundational idea, or even something that shapes what they're writing. And rhythm is really, really not key to a lot of people in terms of how they play or write. And yet, all you would ever need to do is come up with a rhythmic figure of interest, and then whatever you put, the notes that you put to it, if it's interesting rhythmically, you can count on the fact it's going to be interesting. So I do teach along those lines, but I don't know what it is. Rhythm is it's another dimension when it's explored to those kind of depths, and when it's developed, and and the expertise of these drummers. It's just something to behold. They accelerate as a unit. The things that they do are things that, most people they can't do or conceive of doing. It seems humanly impossible, some of the tempos and the precision at those tempos.
Yep. Yep. Well, I want people to know that Jazz on the Tube is contributing something to the development of the CD financially, small amount, but it's something.
Oh, thank you.
It's just a natural. I mean, this is such important work. And if anybody listening to this is similarly moved to support this work, because it's important work, and there may be somebody doing it on this kind of level, but I don't know anybody who's bringing the two traditions together with such integrity and precision. And it's not easy to do it, and it's very important work. So you can write me at ken@jazzonthetube.com, and I will tell you how to hook up with Michele, and if you're inclined or inspired to support as we are, because I'm inspired just listening to this interview. I'm so glad we had this chance to talk. I know that you said that you had to be somewhere at a certain time.
Oh no, I'm okay.
Yeah,
just so you know, I'm okay.
Oh, okay, because we're coming up on that time. But yeah, so everybody definitely, if you're in the New York area, mark your calendar, January 7th of the new year. If you're not in New York, that might be a good reason to come to New York. And if you're interested in supporting this work, write me at ken@jazzonthetube.com. Definitely hunt down what is now the only New Yoruba album, the 2 CD album. Great preparation for what's about to come. And Michele, I want to thank you so much.
That can be found on CD Baby and Amazon, and easy to find online.
Oh, great. I'm glad it's an easy circulation.
Mm-hmm.
Michele, thanks so much for the time. This has been really enlightening. I've always loved your music. The last time I heard you were a guest at Pedrito Martinez's CD release party at the Symphony Space.
Mm.
You were there.
I don't remember.
I saw you there. Remember, though, it was a big crowd. This was maybe not this summer, but the previous summer.
At Symphony Space?
Yeah, upstairs.
Oh, anyway.
Maybe.
Huh.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember that, Ken.
Oh, maybe I projected you into the space.
I think so. There was some other events I was at where but we never met, huh?
Never. We never met personally, no. But I've certainly seen you over the years play, and somebody wrote a really nice article about you. I wish I could remember. Oh, Tomas.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that sort of put it in my head. Oh, I've got to talk to Michele. And then I discovered that your project is coming to fruition. I thought this is the perfect time to talk.
It is a great time. I thank you for it, and I want to say as well that your website is incredible. I just scratched the surface, and I mean, I could find myself on that for days. There's so much great music and video and information there. So thank you so much for what you do.
Oh, well, thanks for saying. And for people listening to this who may not know, we have a whole Cuba section that we've started building out in the last 2 years. And we've got over 50 pages with music and, text explaining things. So the more you know, the more you're going to really appreciate how deep this is. And there's no end to it, and it's all good. So if you haven't started to check it out, don't be intimidated that you don't know all about Afro-Cuban music. You just learn it one step at a time, and once you have a foundation in it, which we help you do, you'll see that there's a whole universe there that you didn't even know. You were living in this parallel universe and didn't even know it. And a good way to step into it is with Michele and Michelle's music. Believe me. So, Michele, thanks again. And
thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'm going to send you an email right after this call, and we will talk soon.
Okay, Ken. Thanks again. Look forward to meeting you.
Okay.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you did, please share it. That's how we grow. And remember to subscribe to jazzonthetube.com, the Internet's largest collection of free, streamable, classic jazz videos.